Tonight, I invite you to rest your mind. Settle into the quiet comfort of your bed. Take a slow, deep breath, and let the worries of the day gently fade away. There is nothing left to do now, and nowhere else you need to be. So just listen and know that it is perfectly okay if you drift off into sleep long before this story ends. Let us travel back together, across the centuries, to a quiet evening in colonial Boston in the year 1706. Picture a small, wooden house softly illuminated by a flickering candle, where in the warm light, a boy leans carefully over a book he should not have been reading so late into the night. This is the life of Benjamin Franklin, whispered gently into the darkness. We know him now as a printer and a scientist, a diplomat and a founding father, but tonight we will simply know him as a child. Over the next hours, we will walk slowly alongside him, from his humble beginnings as a soap maker's son in Boston, to a grassy field with a kite dancing in a distant thunderstorm. We will follow his steady footsteps into the grand halls of Versailles, and finally, to a quiet lamplit room in Philadelphia, where history would wait for his final signature. Let us drift back to the Boston of 1706. It was not yet the great city we know today, but rather a quiet provincial outpost resting gently on the edge of a vast and largely unknown continent. The narrow streets were unpaved, turning to soft, yielding mud in the spring rains, while the harbor was a gentle forest of wooden masts and rigging where ships rested quietly after long, weary journeys across the Atlantic. The damp air carried the constant mingling scents of salt water, wood smoke, and the heavy sweetness of molasses from the Caribbean. It was a deeply religious community, built by Puritans who lived their lives in careful, quiet devotion. Church bells marked the slow passage of the hours, calling the faithful to worship and letting their deep, resonant chimes settle softly over the wooden rooftops. On Sundays, a profound stillness fell over the town, as no work was permitted, no carts rolled over the cobblestones, and families gathered in their homes, reading quietly and eating simple meals that had been prepared the day before. Into this measured, orderly world, Josiah Franklin had arrived years earlier, seeking a place where he might worship freely and live in peace. He had left behind his home in England and crossed the wide, unpredictable ocean, bringing with him little more than his faith and a quiet willingness to work. Though he had trained as a dyer of fine cloth, the simple colonials had little need for such luxuries, and so Josiah calmly taught himself an entirely new trade. He became a tallow chandler and a soap maker, spending his days rendering animal fat in large iron kettles and pouring it carefully into wooden molds to form the candles that would light the dark winter nights of Boston. It was humble, heavy work, and the thick, earthy scent of boiling tallow clung to his clothes and drifted endlessly through the rooms of their home on Milk Street. Josiah's first wife passed away after blessing him with 7 children, leaving him to care for a bustling and demanding household. In time, he married Abiah Folger, a remarkably strong and capable woman from the island of Nantucket, who possessed a rare and beautiful gift for the era, as she knew how to read and write fluently. Abiah brought a steady warmth and a sharp intelligence to the home, managing the endless chores, the cooking, and the accounting with a cheerful patience that amazed all who knew her. Together, she and Josiah would have 10 more children. In the deep winter of 1706, on a cold January day, their son Benjamin was born. He was Josiah's 15th child and his 10th son, a small, quiet arrival in a house already overflowing with life. The Franklin home was a place of constant motion and comforting noise, a modest 2-story wooden house where privacy was simply an impossible luxury. The children shared beds, sleeping 3 or 4 to a mattress, huddling close together beneath heavy blankets on freezing winter nights, while the rhythmic sound of rain drummed softly against the wooden shingles above. Meals were frugal and simple, centered around warm bread, butter, salted fish, and cornmeal mush, eaten at a long wooden table where Abiah patiently served the younger ones and Josiah presided over the gathered family. Yet, despite the cramped quarters and the endless daily demands of the candle shop downstairs, the house was remarkably rich in things that mattered far more than physical wealth. Josiah was a thoughtful, reflective man who loved good conversation and he often invited educated friends, passing ministers, and fellow craftsmen to share their simple meals. As the fire crackled gently in the hearth, throwing warm, dancing shadows against the walls, young Benjamin would sit quietly at the edge of the table, his chin resting in his hands, listening with wide-eyed fascination as the adults discussed theology, philosophy, and the natural world. In those quiet evening hours, breathing in the familiar scent of wood smoke and listening to the soothing cadence of their voices, the young boy learned that ideas were beautiful and that the life of the mind was a vast, peaceful landscape waiting to be explored. Josiah noticed the bright, inquisitive nature of his youngest son, and a gentle hope began to take root in his heart. According to old traditions, a father might offer his 10th son as a tithe to God, dedicating his life entirely to the service of the church. Josiah dreamed that Benjamin, with his quick mind and his endless quiet questions, would one day stand in a beautifully carved wooden pulpit as a respected Puritan minister, guiding his congregation with wise and carefully chosen words. It was a noble, quiet dream, one that required years of formal schooling and great financial sacrifice from a humble candlemaker. But Josiah was determined to give his bright boy the chance to reach for something profound. To honor this quiet dream, when Benjamin was 8 years old, Josiah enrolled him in the prestigious Boston Latin School. It was a place of deep, resonant tradition, where the air smelled faintly of old paper, binding leather, and ink, and young boys sat quietly at heavy wooden desks, tracing the words of ancient languages, while the town outside went about its measured business. For a few bright, peaceful months, Benjamin thrived in this quiet sanctuary of learning, absorbing his lessons with a gentle ease and rising steadily to the head of his class. His teachers recognized a rare, quiet brilliance in him, praising his quick mind. But the reality of a tallow chandler's life was a heavy, inescapable weight. The family simply could not afford the tuition, nor could they spare the hands of a growing boy when so many mouths needed feeding. And so, with a quiet resignation that asked for no pity, Josiah withdrew his son from the school. He tried a simpler, less expensive academy for a short time, a quiet room where Benjamin practiced his handwriting and struggled gently with the repetition of numbers. But by the time he was 10 years old, his formal education came to a soft, permanent close. He would never sit in a classroom again, never walk the quiet grounds of a university, nor earn a formal degree. Instead, at 10 years old, Benjamin stepped fully into the warm, thick air of his father's shop to learn the family trade. His days became a slow, rhythmic repetition of humble, necessary tasks. He cut thick cotton wicks with careful precision, gently tended the fires burning beneath great iron kettles of bubbling fat, and poured the warm, golden liquid into wooden molds, waiting patiently for them to cool and harden. The heavy, earthy scent of melting tallow clung to his clothes and his hair, an ever-present reminder of the boundaries of his small world. It was tedious, monotonous work, demanding patience rather than intellect. And as the boy stood by the warm kettles, his mind began to drift away from the shop, wandering down the muddy, unpaved streets toward the open water. He looked out at the bustling harbor, watching the tall, graceful ships swaying gently at anchor, listening to the soft creaking of their wooden masts and the rhythmic lapping of the tide against the docks. The sea called to him with a quiet promise of freedom, adventure, and distant shores, and he began to dream of leaving the heavy candle molds behind, letting himself be carried away by the gentle currents of the open ocean. Josiah noticed his son's distant gaze, the way his eyes lingered on the horizon, and the older man felt a familiar, quiet ache in his chest. He had already lost one son to the unpredictable sea, a boy who had sailed away into the mist and simply never returned, and he could not bear the thought of losing another to the deep water. Wishing to keep his bright boy safely tethered to the land, Josiah began taking Benjamin on long, unhurried walks through the winding streets of Boston. Together, father and son moved slowly past the busy harbor and into the quiet, industrious corners of the town, visiting the workshops of different tradesmen. They stood in the warm, sawdust-covered rooms of carpenters, watching as skilled hands guided sharp planes over pale wood, sending soft, fragrant curls falling gently to the floor. They listened to the steady, comforting scrape of a bricklayer's trowel, smoothing mortar into perfectly straight lines, and watched as turners worked their wooden lathes, spinning raw branches into smooth, elegant shapes. Josiah hoped that the quiet rhythm of one of these crafts would capture his son's restless imagination, giving him a peaceful, engaging trade that would keep him firmly rooted on solid ground. While these slow, observant walks taught Benjamin a great deal about how things were made and how the physical world worked, his true sanctuary was not found in wood or stone or metal. It was found in the quiet, comforting weight of a book. While other boys played in the narrow streets, and while the rest of his large, noisy family slept soundly through the night, Benjamin would retreat into the encompassing dark. He saved every spare penny he could gather, foregoing small comforts to borrow or buy books, bringing them back to his shared room like precious treasures. There, in the profound stillness of the sleeping house, with the soft sound of his brothers breathing nearby, he would light a single, small candle. By its soft, flickering glow, he read far into the night, carefully turning the rough paper pages. He journeyed alongside John Bunyan's pilgrims, seeking grace in a quiet landscape, and walked the marble steps of ancient Rome, reading the noble histories of Greek philosophers and quiet statesmen in Plutarch's Lives. He read Daniel Defoe's gentle arguments for improving society, absorbing ideas that seemed to glow as brightly as the small flame beside him. While the rest of the world rested, Benjamin Franklin sat bathed in a pool of warm candlelight, filling his mind with a profound peace, as the wax melted slowly away and the night drifted gently toward morning. When Benjamin was 12 years old, a gentle shift occurred that would pull him away from the heavy, lingering scent of melting tallow and into a world he had only ever dreamed of. His older brother James, who had spent years learning his trade across the ocean in London, returned to Boston and opened a printing house. He brought with him the heavy, beautiful wooden presses and the small, delicate lead letters that would slowly shape Benjamin's future. Recognizing his youngest son's restless mind and his deep, abiding love of books, Josiah carefully arranged for Benjamin to be apprenticed to James, signing an indenture contract that bound the young boy to 9 years of faithful service. For Benjamin, this was not a heavy burden, but rather a quiet, profound revelation. He stepped gladly out of the dark candle shop and into a bright room filled with the sharp, clean smell of fresh ink, damp paper, and the comforting, rhythmic clattering of the great printing press. It was physically demanding work, requiring him to stand for hours at a time, carefully selecting individual metal letters from wooden cases and setting them backward into a small composing stick. But Benjamin found a deep, meditative peace in the slow process. He loved the solid weight of the paper, the rich, dark smell of the printed pages as they were gently pulled from the press, and the beautiful realization that he would now spend his days surrounded entirely by words. The print shop offered another, perhaps even greater comfort, as it brought him closer to the booksellers and the apprentices of other trades, who would occasionally lend him rare volumes he could never afford to buy on his own. Sometimes, an apprentice would slip him a book late in the evening, and Benjamin would retreat to his quiet room, lighting his small, familiar candle. He would sit by its soft, flickering glow, reading carefully through the still hours of the night, absorbing poetry, philosophy, and history, only to gently and perfectly return the volume the next morning before it was ever missed. He also began to teach himself the slow, beautiful art of writing, finding old essays from a London paper and rewriting them entirely from memory. He would patiently compare his words to the originals, slowly expanding his vocabulary and learning how sentences could be crafted to flow together like water washing smoothly over river stones. When Benjamin was 15, James made a bold decision and started a newspaper called the New England Current, offering the people of Boston a place to read original essays and gentle satire alongside the usual news of arriving merchant ships and royal proclamations. Benjamin watched quietly as his brother's educated friends gathered in the warm shop, discussing philosophy and writing thoughtful pieces for the paper. A quiet, steady longing grew within the boy to see his own words printed on those soft, ink-stained pages, but he knew that James would never publish the thoughts of a mere teenage apprentice. And so, Benjamin devised a careful, quiet plan. In the still, peaceful hours before dawn, while the rest of the city slept soundly beneath a blanket of sea fog, Benjamin sat at a small table and wrote a letter in a disguised, elegant hand. He signed it with a name that did not exist, calling himself Silence Dogood, claiming to be an observant, middle-aged widow living quietly in the countryside. With the ink barely dry, he walked softly through the dark, muddy streets to the print shop and slipped the paper quietly beneath the heavy wooden door, returning home to wait. When James and his friends found the letter the next morning, they were delighted by the widow's charming, conversational tone. They published it immediately, and the people of Boston smiled as they read the words, wondering who this mysterious, intelligent woman could be. Benjamin wrote 14 of these letters, standing quietly by the heavy wooden presses as he set the type for his very own words, listening with a hidden, gentle pride as the gentleman in the shop praised the widow's brilliance. But when he finally revealed his secret, hoping his brother would be proud of his skill, the atmosphere in the shop grew cold and heavy. James was deeply embarrassed to have been fooled by a boy, and a quiet, lasting resentment began to sour their days. The natural affection between the brothers frayed, replaced by long silences and a harsh, unyielding authority. James began to use his position as master to punish his apprentice, resorting to physical discipline that left the young boy feeling profoundly sorrowful and alone. When Benjamin was 17, he knew that he could no longer remain bound to his brother's heavy hand. He made a quiet, definitive choice to leave his home, knowing that breaking an apprenticeship was a serious offense that would make him a fugitive. He secretly sold some of his cherished books to gather a few small coins, and in the crisp, fading light of October 1723, he walked softly to the harbor. He boarded a small boat bound for New York, leaving behind the only world he had ever known, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a mind filled with a quiet, unshakable hope. The small boat carried him through rough, unpredictable seas for 3 days, the wooden hull creaking softly against the wind, delivering him to the unfamiliar streets of New York, cold, hungry, and entirely alone. He found the city's only printer, an older man named William Bradford, who had no work to offer, but gently suggested that his son in Philadelphia might need a steady hand. And so the young boy continued his quiet, solitary journey south. The passage was far from simple, as a sudden squall caught his small ferry in the bay, leaving him to spend 30 long hours soaked to the skin, bailing water beneath dark, heavy clouds that seemed to swallow the sky. When he finally reached land at Perth Amboy, he walked 50 miles through the steady, pouring rain, his boots sinking into the soft, muddy road that stretched endlessly before him, until he reached the quiet town of Burlington. There, exhausted but determined, he boarded a small boat that drifted slowly down the Delaware River through the dark, silent night, the rhythmic lapping of the water against the wood lulling him as the morning light began to softly break across the horizon. On a quiet Sunday morning in early October, the weary traveler finally stepped onto the smooth cobblestones of Philadelphia. He was profoundly tired, his clothes stained and wrinkled from the arduous journey, and his pockets held only a few small foreign coins. Guided by the deep, comforting pang of hunger, he found a baker's shop and asked for 3 pennies worth of bread, receiving 3 enormous, warm, puffy rolls that smelled faintly of yeast and wood ash. With no place to put them, he tucked one beneath each arm and walked slowly down Market Street, eating the third while observing the quiet Sunday morning unfold around him. It was a humble, almost comical sight, and a young woman named Deborah Reed, standing in the doorway of her family's home, watched the bedraggled boy pass by, letting out a soft, gentle laugh at the strange, endearing spectacle. She could not have known then that this weary stranger, clutching his morning bread, would one day become her husband and her partner in all things. Following the quiet stream of people walking through the streets, Benjamin found an open Quaker meeting house and sat down among the silent congregates. The warmth of the room and the profound meditative stillness soon embraced him, letting him drift into a deep, peaceful sleep, safe at last in his new city. By the next morning, rested and clear-minded, he found his way into the employ of Samuel Keimer, an eccentric printer with a long, flowing beard who kept the quiet rhythms of the Jewish Sabbath. Benjamin thrived in the bright, open atmosphere of Philadelphia, a city laid out in neat, orderly squares, filled with gentle tolerance and far removed from the strict, heavy oversight of Puritan Boston. His quiet brilliance at the printing press, the neatness of his work, and the speed of his hands soon drew the attention of the colonial governor, Sir William Keith. The governor, a man of grand words and easy promises, was charmed by the articulate young printer and offered to finance a beautiful new print shop for him, suggesting that Benjamin travel across the ocean to London to select the finest metal type and heavy wooden presses. Trusting the word of a gentleman, the hopeful 18-year-old boarded a tall ship in the fading light of November 1724, standing at the rail as the coastline faded into a gray mist, expecting letters of credit from the governor to be waiting for him when they finally docked. The voyage across the vast, rolling Atlantic took many long weeks, the ship swaying gently over the deep, dark water as the days blurred into one continuous rhythm of wind and sail. But when the heavy iron anchor was finally lowered in the busy, fog-laden port of London in the cold days of December, the promised letters of credit were nowhere to be found. The governor had simply made a hollow promise, leaving Benjamin stranded in an immense, overwhelming city of nearly 600,000 souls, far from his home and entirely without funds. Yet the boy did not panic, for he possessed a quiet, unshakable faith in his own two hands. Finding work immediately at one of the finest printing houses in London, he stood shoulder to shoulder with experienced English craftsmen, his fingers moving with a swift, practiced grace over the complex type cases. While the other men drank heavy pints of ale to sustain their strength, the young American drank only pure, clear water, lifting the heavy iron presses with a calm, steady endurance that earned their quiet respect. For 18 months, he absorbed the profound, bustling life of London, walking its narrow, smoke-filled streets, reading in its warm coffee houses, and learning the delicate, sophisticated techniques of the master printers, quietly gathering the skills that would one day help him build his own lasting world back across the sea. The long, quiet voyage across the vast Atlantic came to a gentle end in the crisp autumn of 1726. For 11 slow weeks, the ship had drifted over the deep, rolling water, while Benjamin spent his days peacefully observing the dolphins dancing in the waves and writing thoughtful reflections in his quiet journal. When the heavy wooden ship finally glided into the familiar harbor of Philadelphia, he stepped ashore as a young man of 20, profoundly changed by the immense, complex world of London, yet carrying no more wealth than he had when he left. For a brief, quiet season, he worked as a humble clerk in a merchant's store, patiently keeping ledgers and learning the gentle flow of commerce. But when the merchant passed away, the deep, familiar pull of the printing press called him back to the trade he knew so well. The sharp, earthy scent of black ink, the comforting texture of unprinted paper, and the soft, metallic clinking of lead type were simply a part of his soul, and he calmly found his way back into the familiar, rhythmic employment of Samuel Keimer's shop. In the quiet, darkening evenings of 1727, as the city settled softly into its restful nighttime routine, Benjamin felt a gentle desire for meaningful conversation. He gathered a small, thoughtful circle of fellow tradesmen and artisans, and together they formed a club dedicated entirely to mutual improvement, calling themselves the Junto. They met softly every Friday evening in a warm, candlelit room, leaving the heavy labor of their weeks behind to share their minds. As the fire crackled gently in the hearth, throwing warm, dancing shadows against the wooden walls, these young men, a shoemaker, a surveyor, a cabinet maker, and fellow printers, would sit together, sipping warm drinks and discussing philosophy, morality, and the quiet mysteries of the natural world. There was no urgency in their debates, no harsh disagreements, only a peaceful, shared desire to understand the world a little better. They read to one another, traded their precious heavy books, and supported each other in their quiet trades, slowly building a foundation of deep, enduring friendships that would gently shape the rest of their lives. By the time he was 22, the quiet desire to guide his own destiny led Benjamin to open his very own print shop on the smooth cobblestones of Market Street. Though he began with a partner, he soon took on the full, quiet weight of the business alone, and his days became a steady, unhurried repetition of honest, physical labor. Long before the sun broke over the horizon, while the city streets were still draped in the soft, gray mist of early morning, Benjamin was already awake. He could often be seen gently pushing a heavy wooden wheelbarrow filled with thick, blank paper through the quiet town, an enduring image of simple, unyielding industry that earned him the quiet respect of his neighbors. Back in the warm shop, the heavy wooden press became the comforting heartbeat of his life. The work was a slow, moving meditation. He would stand for hours at the wooden cases, his fingers moving with a swift, practiced grace, picking up tiny metal letters and placing them backward into his small composing stick. Quietly, month after month, year after year, the great press turned. The soft, dark ink was rolled smoothly over the lead, the damp paper was carefully laid in place, the heavy lever was pulled with a slow, deep breath, and the pages were gently peeled away to dry. Newspapers, almanacs, and heavy government documents were slowly born into the world through this peaceful, unchanging rhythm. In 1729, he purchased a failing local newspaper called the Pennsylvania Gazette, and with his careful, measured words, he slowly transformed it into a trusted, familiar voice for the colony. There was no grand celebration or dramatic victory in these years, only the peaceful, reassuring monotony of a craft practiced with endless devotion. As his business found its steady, reliable rhythm, Benjamin's heart naturally sought the quiet comforts of a home. He reconnected with Deborah Reed, the very same young woman who had gently smiled from her doorway at his bedraggled appearance on his first Sunday in the city so many years ago. Life had not been easy for Deborah during his time across the ocean, as she had been married to a man who proved untrue, a man who eventually disappeared into the unknown, leaving her legally bound but entirely abandoned. With a quiet, practical grace that asked for no pity and sought only peace, Benjamin and Deborah chose to build a life together, entering into a common-law marriage in the fading summer warmth of 1730. It was a union built not on sweeping romance, but on a deep, abiding partnership and a shared comforting strength. Deborah brought a warm, capable energy to the household, effortlessly managing the shop's small retail counter, selling paper, ink, and books to the quiet townsfolk. Soon their home was filled with the soft sounds of a child, as Benjamin's son William, born just before their marriage, was brought into the house. Deborah took the little boy into her arms without hesitation, raising him with all the tenderness and devotion of her own blood, weaving their unconventional family together with a quiet, boundless love. Together they built a peaceful sanctuary amidst the scent of ink and melting wax, a warm place where the heavy wooden press turned slowly downstairs, and the soft, flickering light of the hearth warmed their quiet, restful evenings. As his business and his quiet family life found a steady, comforting rhythm, Benjamin's thoughts naturally expanded outward into the growing city around him. He believed deeply that knowledge was a quiet gift meant to be shared, rather than locked away in the private studies of wealthy men. And so, in the crisp, fading months of 1731, he and his gentle friends in the junto gathered their modest funds to form the Library Company of Philadelphia. They sent their combined money across the wide, rolling ocean to a bookseller in London, waiting patiently for the heavy wooden crates to return. When the ship finally arrived, bringing volumes of history, philosophy, and science, Benjamin felt a profound, quiet joy. The books were kept in a modest room where members could sit by the soft light of a lamp, carefully turning the thick paper pages, or borrow the volumes to read by their own hearths. It was the very first public subscription library in America, a quiet sanctuary of learning that slowly began to shape the minds of the simple tradesmen and shopkeepers of the city. With the printing press turning steadily downstairs, Benjamin sought a new way to reach the quiet homes and farms spread across the vast, snow-covered landscape of the colonies. In the deep winter of 1732, as the cold wind swept gently through the empty streets, he composed and printed the very first edition of Poor Richard's Almanack. It was a humble, practical book filled with weather predictions, the gentle phases of the moon, and astronomical charts to guide the farmers in their quiet planting. To make the pages more engaging, Benjamin adopted the pen name of Richard Saunders, writing in the voice of a weary, mildly henpecked, but wonderfully wise country astrologer. The almanac was an immediate, quiet triumph, eventually selling 10,000 copies a year, finding its way into almost every colonial home, from the bustling port cities to the isolated, quiet cabins resting on the edge of the wilderness. Woven between the calendars and the tides were gentle proverbs and aphorisms, quiet pieces of wisdom that Benjamin either gathered from old philosophers or softly crafted himself. You can almost hear these words now, spoken softly like a grandfather resting in a comfortable chair, giving gentle advice as the evening fire burns low. He wrote that early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. He softly reminded his readers that a penny saved is a penny earned, a gentle encouragement to value the quiet rewards of thrift and patience. With a wry, knowing smile, he noted that fish and visitors stink in 3 days, and whispered that God helps them that help themselves. These simple, rhythmic phrases became a comforting part of the colonial mind, shared softly across dinner tables and spoken gently out in the open fields, shaping the character of a new people. For 25 years, Benjamin would quietly write and print the almanac, an enduring testament to his gentle wit and boundless industry. His quiet care for his neighbors soon extended beyond the pages of his books and into the very streets of his chosen city. In colonial times, fire was a constant, heavy dread, a silent threat that could swiftly consume the wooden homes built so closely together. Rather than waiting for a distant authority to solve the problem, Benjamin used his newspaper to gently suggest a solution based on mutual help and shared responsibility. In 1736, he gathered a group of willing citizens to form the Union Fire Company, the first volunteer fire department in America. They purchased heavy leather buckets and strong woven baskets, promising to rush to the aid of any neighbor whose home was threatened by the flames. It was a simple, profound act of quiet courage and community, proving that ordinary men could gather together to protect and support one another in the dark. As the years drifted softly by, Benjamin Franklin became a deeply respected pillar of Philadelphia. His wealth grew steadily, not through grand, sweeping victories, but through the patient daily turning of the heavy wooden press, the careful setting of small metal type, and the quiet sale of paper and ink. Yet, as his hair began to thin and the quiet lines of middle age appeared softly around his eyes, his boundless mind began to seek a new horizon. The world of business and politics was familiar and safe, but the natural world held quiet, beautiful mysteries that simply begged to be understood. He began to look beyond the warm, lamplit walls of his printing shop, turning his gaze upward to the vast, open sky, where dark, heavy clouds gathered, holding secrets that he was quietly determined to uncover. As Benjamin reached his early 40s, the heavy printing press that had been the steady, familiar heartbeat of his life began to slow its rhythm. By 1748, he found himself financially secure enough to step back from the daily ink-stained labor of the shop, gently handing the heavy work to a trusted partner. He sought a quiet retirement, not to rest idly in a comfortable chair, but to turn his curious, unhurried mind toward the vast, beautiful mysteries of the natural world. Even before he left the print shop, his thoughts had often drifted to the simple comforts of colonial homes. In the deep, bitter winters of Pennsylvania, families huddled close to their hearths, losing much of the warmth up the dark chimney, while the edges of the room remained stubbornly cold. With his usual quiet ingenuity, Benjamin designed a cast-iron stove that sat safely away from the wall, radiating a gentle, even heat in all directions, while carrying the wood smoke safely outside. He called it the Pennsylvania fireplace, though the world would forever remember it as the Franklin stove. When the governor offered him a patent that could have brought him great personal wealth, he calmly and gracefully declined. He wrote simply that as we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, we should be glad of an opportunity to serve others by our own. It was a quiet gift, freely given to warm the homes of his neighbors as the snow fell softly outside their windows. Yet his mind soon reached beyond the comforting warmth of the hearth and out into the vast, open sky. In the middle of the 18th century, electricity was a profound, fascinating mystery, a strange phenomenon used mostly for parlor tricks by traveling lecturers who would summon small, harmless sparks for paying crowds in darkened rooms. Benjamin watched these quiet, glowing demonstrations and felt a deep, steady pull to understand the hidden laws that govern them. He acquired a simple glass Leyden jar and transformed a quiet room in his home into a peaceful sanctuary of observation. Through slow, meticulous experimentation, he began to unravel the invisible threads of this strange, crackling force. He discovered that electricity was not created out of nothing, but simply moved from one place to another in a quiet, eternal balance. He gave the world words we still use today, gently describing charges as positive and negative, and proving that this invisible fluid flowed through the world with the same quiet predictability as water moving in a gentle stream. His careful observations eventually led him to a bold, beautiful thought, realizing that the small, crackling sparks in his glass jars were exactly the same as the great, flashing lightning that illuminated the heavy summer skies, differing only in their magnificent scale. To prove this quiet truth, he devised an experiment that would slowly become legend. In June of 1752, a dark, rolling thunderstorm gathered softly over the green fields on the outskirts of Philadelphia. The air grew heavy and still as Benjamin and his grown son William walked quietly into a simple wooden shed, carrying a kite made of fine silk, chosen specifically to withstand the driving rain. A small metal wire was attached to the top, and a brass key was tied carefully near the bottom of the long hemp string. To protect his hand, Benjamin held a dry silk ribbon tied below the key. As the rain began to fall in soft, rhythmic sheets, sweeping across the tall grass, they raised the kite into the darkening sky. For a long, peaceful moment, nothing happened. The wind pulled gently at the silk, and the rain washed over them in a soothing, continuous hush. But as the string grew thoroughly wet, Benjamin noticed the tiny, loose fibers of the hemp beginning to stand up, perfectly straight and still, repelled by the invisible force traveling slowly down from the clouds. He slowly reached out his hand, bringing his knuckle close to the cold metal of the brass key. A small, bright spark leapt across the quiet distance, and he felt a gentle, thrilling shock. The great, mysterious heavens and his quiet, lamplit laboratory were governed by the exact same laws. Having gently pulled this profound secret from the clouds, Benjamin immediately turned his mind back to the quiet safety of his fellow man. If lightning was indeed electricity, he reasoned, then a simple iron rod, rising above a roof and connected to the deep earth, could draw the dangerous fire safely away from wooden homes and tall church steeples. The lightning rod was born, a quiet, protective guardian that soon stood watch over the rooftops of Philadelphia, carrying the storm's energy harmlessly into the ground, preventing countless fires and preserving endless lives. The news of his careful, elegant experiments drifted slowly across the ocean to the great intellectual halls of Europe. The boy who had never finished a single year of formal schooling, who had once walked the muddy streets of Boston with empty pockets, was now celebrated as a brilliant natural philosopher. The Royal Society of London welcomed him as a fellow, awarding him their highest honors, and prestigious universities draped him in the quiet dignity of honorary degrees. His mind remained in constant, peaceful motion. As his eyes aged, he crafted bifocal glasses, splitting the lenses so he could see the wide, axion, beautiful world and the close, comforting pages of his books, without ever changing his spectacles. He even invented a beautiful musical instrument called the glass harmonica, spinning delicate glass bowls on a quiet spindle to produce a sound so ethereal and soothing that it seemed to float on the evening air like a dream. In these quiet years of thought and invention, Benjamin Franklin found a profound peace, resting comfortably in the knowledge that his gentle hands and his curious mind had made the world just a little bit brighter. As the quiet years of middle age settled softly around him, Benjamin Franklin found his mind gradually turning from the mysteries of the natural world back to the familiar, bustling streets of his fellow men. His life had always been a steady practice of looking for gentle improvements, finding small, quiet ways to make the days easier for those around him. This profound desire to serve naturally led him away from the warm glow of his printing shop and into the calm, measured halls of local government. He began simply, serving as the clerk of the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1736, patiently recording the words of others while quietly observing the gentle flow of colonial politics. By 1751, the people of Philadelphia chose him to sit among them as an elected representative, trusting his calm demeanor and his deeply practical wisdom. His quiet influence soon stretched far beyond the cobblestone streets of his own city. In 1753, he was appointed to safely oversee the mail as the Deputy Postmaster General for all the British colonies in America. For Benjamin, this was not a distant administrative task, but a beautiful opportunity to connect the scattered, quiet lives of farmers and merchants from New England all the way to the southern shores. He traveled slowly along the dusty, unpaved roads in a simple horse-drawn carriage, observing the vast forested landscape and carefully mapping gentle routes to ensure that letters carrying words of love, news of birth, and simple comforts could flow reliably between distant families. Under his patient, steady guidance, the mail moved with a new, comforting rhythm, bringing a peaceful certainty to a deeply uncertain world and drawing the isolated colonies just a little bit closer together. As the colonies grew, so too did the quiet shadows of conflict on the distant frontiers. In the summer of 1754, as the heavy green leaves of the northern woods provided a soft shade, representatives from 7 colonies gathered in the quiet town of Albany, New York. They came to discuss their shared defense against the gathering storm of the French and Indian War. They sat together in a modest room, the warm summer breeze drifting gently through the open windows, listening as Benjamin offered a profound, gentle vision for the future, proposing the Albany Plan of Union. He calmly suggested that the separate colonies might gather together under a single unified council, standing as one peaceful body while maintaining the comforting familiarity of their local traditions. Though the idea was gently rejected by both the nervous colonial assemblies and the distant British government, he had quietly planted a beautiful seed in the colonial mind. A soft whisper of unity that would rest in the earth, waiting patiently for a new season to bloom. During the troubled, weary years of the war, Benjamin did not carry a musket or ride into the smoke of battle. Instead, he used his quiet genius for organization to support those who did. When the British General Braddock arrived in the wilderness, struggling to move his heavy supplies through the thick, untamed forests, Benjamin calmly stepped forward. With his usual gentle persuasion, he quietly visited the simple farmers of Pennsylvania, sitting with them on their wooden porches and convincing them to lend their wooden wagons and strong horses to the effort, bringing a peaceful order to the desperate chaos of the military campaign. His ability to solve complex problems with a calm, steady hand only deepened the profound respect the people held for him. He was no longer just the clever printer of Market Street. He had become a trusted, fatherly guardian of the colony's well-being. But the relationship between the quiet colonies and the grand, distant mother country was beginning to fray, the invisible threads pulling tight across the vast ocean. Believing that his calm reasoning and patient words could soothe the growing misunderstandings, the Pennsylvania Assembly asked him to travel across the deep water to London, to serve as their gentle voice in the halls of Parliament. In the soft, warming air of June 1757, Benjamin prepared to leave his home once again. He walked slowly through the quiet rooms of his house, knowing he would miss the simple comforts of his domestic life. It was a deeply bittersweet departure. His beloved Deborah, harboring a quiet, unshakable terror of the unpredictable sea, chose to remain safely behind in the comforting familiarity of their home. And so, at 51 years old, Benjamin Franklin boarded a heavy wooden ship, watching the green coastline of America slowly fade into the gray mist. Believing his journey would be a brief, peaceful interlude, completely unaware that 18 long years would pass before he walked those familiar cobblestone streets again. When the heavy wooden ship finally dropped anchor in the familiar, fog-draped harbor of London in 1757, Benjamin stepped ashore into a city he had not seen since he was a young, struggling apprentice. But he was no longer an anonymous journeyman seeking work in the crowded, noisy printing houses. He returned as an internationally celebrated scientist and a respected colonial representative. He settled quietly into a comfortable brick house on Craven Street, where his landlady, Margaret Stevenson, and her daughter gently welcomed him, creating a warm, surrogate family that offered him the quiet domestic comforts he missed so deeply. In the soft gray light of the English afternoons, with a gentle fire crackling in the hearth and the sound of rain tapping softly against the window panes, Benjamin found a peaceful sanctuary amidst the overwhelming bustle of the vast city. He would sit by the warm glow of the fire, listening to the muffled sounds of the carriages rolling over the wet cobblestones outside, feeling entirely at peace. His days were filled with a calm, intellectual grace. The prestigious universities of St. Andrews and Oxford draped him in the quiet dignity of honorary degrees, and the boy who had never finished a single year of formal schooling was now respectfully addressed by all as Dr. Franklin. He was warmly welcomed into the Royal Society, where he gathered with fellow scientists to discuss the gentle laws of nature, the flow of the oceans, and the quiet mysteries of the natural world. He sat comfortably in soft leather chairs alongside great philosophers like David Hume, Adam Smith, and Joseph Priestley. Together, they would sip warm tea and share their thoughts on the moral progress of humanity, enjoying a deeply fulfilling, peaceful existence surrounded by minds that matched his own endless curiosity. But his primary mission in London was a political one, and the quiet harmony he so desperately wished to maintain between the mother country and her distant colonies was slowly beginning to fracture. The British government, weary from years of war and seeking new revenue, began to place heavy taxes upon the American people. In 1765, the Stamp Act required the colonies to pay a tax on printed paper, and a profound, restless anger began to sweep across the ocean. Hoping to calm the rising tide of misunderstanding, Benjamin stood before the British Parliament, answering their questions with a calm, measured dignity. He spoke softly but firmly, explaining that his fellow Americans were loyal subjects who simply wished to be treated with fairness and respect. His clear, patient reasoning temporarily soothed the tensions, and the act was repealed, bringing a brief, quiet sigh of relief to the strained empire. Yet the peace was fragile, and the invisible threads connecting the two lands continued to pull and fray. As new taxes were imposed on glass, paper, and tea, the distant colonies pushed back. A tragic, quiet shedding of blood on the snowy streets of Boston and the silent midnight defiance of tea poured gently into the dark harbor, signaled that the era of peaceful compromise was drawing to a close. Benjamin tried endlessly to weave the unraveling edges back together, writing thoughtful essays and proposing gentle compromises, but the distance had grown too vast. In early 1774, he was summoned before the Privy Council in a room known as the Cockpit. There he stood perfectly still and silent for an hour, his face calm and expressionless, as British officials harshly attacked his character and his loyalty. He offered no angry response, but in the quiet depths of his heart, he realized with a profound sorrow that the British Empire he had loved and tried to preserve was finally broken beyond repair. Amidst the heavy weight of this political failure, a much deeper, quieter sorrow reached him from across the ocean. Late in 1774, letters arrived carrying the tragic news that his beloved Deborah had passed away. She had waited for him in their quiet Philadelphia home through all the long years of his absence, terrified of the vast sea and unable to join him. A profound, unshakable guilt settled softly over his spirit, mourning the gentle woman who had built his life, managed his affairs, and raised his children. He ached with the knowledge that he had not been there to hold her hand at the very end. With his heart heavy and his hopes for peace quietly extinguished, the 69-year-old statesman slowly packed his belongings. In the early spring of 1775, he boarded a ship to cross the deep, rolling Atlantic one last time, listening to the soft rhythm of the waves as he sailed away from his British life and toward a home that was quietly preparing for the birth of a new nation. When Benjamin Franklin finally stepped off the heavy wooden ship and arrived back in Philadelphia in the gentle spring of 1775, he found a familiar land that was already quietly changing. He was 69 years old, deeply tired from his long, rolling voyage across the Atlantic, and his heart longed only for the quiet comforts of his home. Yet almost immediately upon his arrival, the people of Pennsylvania called upon his steady, reassuring wisdom once more, electing him to serve as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress. He walked slowly through the familiar cobblestone streets and into the grand brick building of the Pennsylvania State House, taking his seat among a bright new generation of colonial leaders. As the oldest delegate in the room, his thin hair pulled back and his eyes wise from decades of quiet observation, he offered a deeply calming, grandfatherly presence. While younger men spoke with fiery passion and restless emotion, Benjamin sat quietly in his wooden chair, his hands folded peacefully in his lap, listening with infinite patience as the heavy debates stretched softly through the long, warm days of spring. As the gentle breezes of May slowly gave way to the thick, humid heat of a Philadelphia summer, the gathered men recognized that the invisible threads connecting them to the mother country were finally permanently severed. The time had gently arrived to carefully write down their profound reasons for seeking a new, independent life, offering their thoughts to the judgment of the world. To craft this delicate message, Benjamin was placed on a small, thoughtful committee alongside 4 other men, including a brilliant lawyer from Massachusetts named John Adams, deeply reflective young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson, knowing that his own physical strength was fading and possessing the quiet grace to step aside. Benjamin allowed the young Jefferson to hold the heavy responsibility of the pen. He retreated softly to the background, resting in his comfortable lodgings, while the younger man poured his mind onto the smooth parchment. When Jefferson finally brought his finished draft to Benjamin's quiet, lamplit room for review, the older statesman read the words with a slow, careful eye, appreciating the beautiful rhythm of the prose. But with his lifelong instinct for the perfect, simple phrase, Benjamin saw a place where the heavy words could be gently softened. Where Jefferson had originally written that the rights of all men were sacred and undeniable, Benjamin quietly crossed out the ink, replacing it with a simpler, more elegant thought, noting softly that we hold these truths to be self-evident. With a few gentle strokes of his feather quill, he removed the heavy, religious weight from the sentence, grounding the eternal rights of humanity in the quiet, unshakable laws of nature and reason. On a warm July morning in 1776, as a soft summer breeze drifted through the open windows of the State House, the Congress formally adopted the beautiful, heavy words of the Declaration of Independence. It was a moment of profound, quiet consequence. The men sitting in that room knew perfectly well the immense weight of what they were doing, understanding that by signing this document, they were making an irreversible choice that would change their lives forever. Benjamin whispered gently to his fellow delegates, a soft, wry smile playing upon his lips, reminding them that they must now all hang together, or they would most assuredly face a dark and heavy fate entirely alone. Yet there was no panic in the room, only a deeply settled, quiet resolve. And so, in the quiet, lingering heat of that Philadelphia summer, 56 men slowly walked forward, one by one, to place their names upon a single, large sheet of thick parchment. When it was his turn, Benjamin Franklin rose slowly from his chair, taking the feather quill in his aging hand. He dipped it softly into the dark ink and wrote his name with the very same careful, steady precision he had learned so many years ago as a humble apprentice. He was no longer just a printer or a curious scientist. He was a founding father, helping to softly breathe life into a new nation, standing peacefully at the quiet threshold of history as the summer sun rose gently over America. As the heavy parchment of the Declaration was safely rolled away, the new nation found itself in a quiet, desperate need of friends. In the fading, deeply chilled days of December 1776, Benjamin was asked to cross the vast, unpredictable ocean once more. He was 70 years old, his body weary from a lifetime of labor and his heart longing for rest, yet he boarded a ship bound for France, sailing softly through the dark, rolling winter waters, trusting the wind to carry him safely to an unfamiliar shore. He arrived in Paris to find a city of unimaginable elegance, soft, rustling silk, and elaborately powdered wigs. But Benjamin, with his usual quiet wisdom, chose not to dress as a European courtier. Instead, he presented himself simply, wearing a plain brown coat and a soft, warm fur cap, carefully cultivating the gentle image of a natural philosopher from the untamed American woods. The French court, weary of its own heavy formalities, was utterly charmed by this peaceful, unpretentious man. He moved gracefully through the grand, echoing halls of Versailles, stepping softly over polished marble floors to be presented to the French court and the young Queen Marie Antoinette. His quiet, grandfatherly presence stood in profound, beautiful contrast to the glittering wealth around him. The people of France adored his gentle demeanor, painting his portrait on delicate porcelain teacups and carving his calm likeness into smooth, wooden snuff boxes. He spent his evenings in comfortable, velvet-draped salons, sipping warm tea and sharing quiet conversations with the most brilliant minds of the age. In one particularly poignant moment, he shared a deeply respectful, quiet meeting with the aging philosopher Voltaire, two great, weary minds bowing softly to one another in the peaceful twilight of their lives. Beneath the gentle charm and the endless, elegant dinners, Benjamin was engaged in the quiet, steady work of diplomacy. He understood that the young American nation desperately needed the strength of the French military and the quiet support of their treasury to survive. Residing in a beautiful, peaceful estate in Passy, just outside the bustling city, he waited patiently, listening to the soft murmur of court politics. He surrounded himself with the quiet comforts of a small printing press, gently setting type just as he had done in his youth, and utilized his newly crafted bifocal glasses so he could comfortably read his heavy correspondence and look out over the gentle French countryside. He never rushed, never demanded, and never pushed too hard, allowing the French ministers to slowly and naturally arrive at their own conclusions. When the time was finally right, in the quiet, cold days of early 1778, he softly signed the treaties of alliance, binding the grand, ancient kingdom of France to the delicate, fragile hopes of America. It was a profound, peaceful victory, a masterstroke of endless patience and gentle persuasion that would slowly change the tide of the war across the distant ocean. He remained in his peaceful French estate for several more years, watching as the leaves turned gold and fell softly to the ground, while the distant war finally drew to a quiet, inevitable close. When it was time to establish a lasting peace, he sat down once more with his fellow Americans, John Adams and John Jay. In the warm, golden light of September 1783, they signed the Treaty of Paris, gently and permanently recognizing the complete independence of the United States. His diplomatic work was beautifully complete, and as he looked out over the soft, manicured gardens of his home, he felt a deep, abiding weariness settling into his bones and a profound, quiet longing to see the familiar streets of Philadelphia one last time. When Benjamin finally returned to the familiar shores of America in the late summer of 1785, he was welcomed not with loud, jarring parades, but with a deeply felt, reverent joy. As his ship glided softly into the harbor, the bells of Philadelphia rang out in a gentle, rolling chorus, and the simple townsfolk lined the cobblestone streets to quietly honor the 79-year-old statesman who had safely guided their fragile new nation into the light. He moved comfortably into a warm, familiar brick house on Market Street, where his loving daughter Sarah and her husband cared for him, filling his days with the soft, happy voices of his grandchildren. Though his body was growing increasingly frail, troubled by the heavy aches of gout and the painful exhaustion of old age, his mind remained as bright and steady as a well-tended hearth fire. Even in his quietest years, the country simply could not do without his gentle wisdom. In the warm, humid summer of 1787, at 81 years old, he was carried softly in a sedan chair to the State House to serve as the oldest delegate at the Constitutional Convention. While the younger men debated intensely over the heavy framework of the new government, Benjamin sat peacefully, listening with infinite patience. When the room grew tense and compromise seemed impossible, he offered a profound, gentle reflection, writing a speech that a friend read softly to the gathered assembly. He admitted quietly that while he did not approve of every single word in the document, he agreed to the Constitution with all its faults, for he had lived long enough to know that his own judgment was not infallible. His soft, humble words broke the heavy deadlock, guiding the men to slowly sign the parchment that would forever bind the nation together. In the peaceful twilight of his life, sitting comfortably by a bright window where the afternoon sun warmed his shoulders, Benjamin spent his remaining energy seeking one last, beautiful improvement for his fellow man. Having grown to view the institution of slavery as a profound moral sorrow, he quietly took on the presidency of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, using his final public actions to gently advocate for human freedom and dignity. When he was not writing his thoughtful letters or slowly adding pages to his autobiography, he simply rested in his quiet room, watching the gentle seasons change outside his window, finding a deep, abiding peace in the knowledge that his long, remarkable journey was finally, beautifully complete. As the long, quiet winter of 1790 softly yielded to the gentle warmth of spring, it became clear that Benjamin's remarkable journey was gently drawing to its close. At 84 years old, his physical frame, which had carried him across vast oceans and through the heavy demands of a deeply industrious life, was finally peacefully surrendering its strength. He spent his final months resting softly in his quiet bed in Philadelphia, where the comforting light of the afternoon sun washed over his familiar books and papers. His devoted daughter Sarah remained a steady, gentle presence at his bedside, ensuring his days were filled with warmth, care, and the soothing murmur of family life. Though his body ached with the heavy toll of his years, he managed his discomfort quietly, welcoming visitors with a soft smile and resting his brilliant mind in the peaceful harbor of his memories. On the quiet evening of April 17, 1790, the final shadows of twilight drifted softly across his room. Surrounded by the comforting embrace of his family, his breathing grew slow and perfectly calm. It is whispered that in these final, peaceful moments, he gently remarked that a dying man can do nothing easy, a soft, weary acknowledgement of his long labor. And then, late in the evening, after a lifetime of boundless curiosity and quiet service to the world, Benjamin Franklin closed his eyes and let go, slipping peacefully into the deep, restful quiet. 4 days later, under a soft, forgiving sky, the people of Philadelphia gathered to say a gentle farewell to their most beloved friend. 20,000 souls, a quiet, mournful ocean of citizens, walked slowly behind his simple wooden casket, honoring him with a profound, unbroken silence. They carried him to the peaceful grounds of Christ Church Cemetery, where he was laid to rest at last beside his dearest Deborah, beneath a plain, unadorned stone, resting together under the endless, quiet watch of the stars. The quiet legacy of Benjamin Franklin did not end on that spring evening, but rather drifted gently into the fabric of the nation he helped to build. Even now, his presence remains a soft, enduring comfort in our daily lives. Every time a reader opens a book in a quiet public library, or a volunteer fire engine safely navigates a dark street, his gentle spirit is there. He lives on in the protective metal of the lightning rods that calmly stand watch over our homes during heavy summer storms, and in the simple, familiar bifocal glasses that help aging eyes read comfortably by the evening light. He never asked for wealth from his quiet inventions, believing simply that knowledge should be freely shared to make the world a slightly better place. He became the very foundation of the American spirit, proving with a quiet grace that a humble tradesman could rise to shape the course of history through boundless curiosity and patient, steady labor. His gentle face looks out from the $100 bill, a quiet reminder of the poor boy who arrived in Philadelphia with nothing but 3 puffy rolls of bread and a mind full of endless hope. When asked what kind of government the founders had created, he famously whispered that it was a republic, if you can keep it. A soft, profound challenge that still echoes gently through time. He was a man who drew lightning safely from the sky, who charmed kings with a simple fur cap, and who left the world far richer than he found it. And so we let him rest, from a candlelit room in Boston to a quiet grave in Philadelphia. The life of Benjamin Franklin, whispered gently into the night. Rest now, the story is ended, but the night continues.